The man who engineered a massive partnership between Nissan and Renault now sits in a Japanese prison, facing a decades-long sentence. Carlos Ghosn is accused of illegally concealing his pay from the government. And while corporate crime typically gets white-collar crooks a slap on the wrist, Japanese prosecutors had a different plan. Ghosn has been held in an empty cell, interrogated without his lawyers, and until Monday has spent months without seeing his family. So is Japan tough on crime or denying a man his due process? Let's go to Washington, D.C. and ask Phil Telfian, the founding director of the organization Equal Justice Under Law, and Shihoko Goto, the deputy director for geoeconomics at the Wilson Center's Asia program. I thank you both for joining us. Phil, let me ask you about that. Human Rights Watch says the Japanese haven't treated him fairly. Do you agree with them?
Absolutely. I think this is fundamentally a human rights issue, and what Mr. Ghosn's case is realizing is happening all across Japan. You see defendants held for weeks or months without access to family or being questioned without a lawyer. There are fundamental due process concerns at stake. He's not even being told the full evidence against him, and this is commonplace in Japan. I would call these due process violations for sure.
Right. So, Phil, what we know is that he's been charged with understating his pay at Nissan by more than $80 million and directing Nissan money to an acquaintance and temporarily transferring personal investment losses to the automaker and so on, right? So they accuse him of fiddling with the finances and lining his pockets. Is there an argument to be made that when it comes to such large sums of money with such a nationally and internationally prestigious organization, that they're tough on him but not violating his due process rights?
The toughness should come in the sentence. If he's found guilty after due process is exercised, then an appropriate penalty can be meted out. The trouble that we're seeing in the Japanese system right now is that he's not being given full access to the evidence against him. His lawyers are not present during interrogation, so the evidence can't be scrutinized by both sides. What happens now is the government has full access to all of the evidence, and Mr. Ghosn himself doesn't even know the full scope, even though the charges have now been made evident before him. Exactly the details on what they're planning to build their case on hasn't been fully scrutinized. The idea of due process is that the criminal defendant and the government have equal access to information. If there are holes in the evidence, if there's another side of the story to be told, the defendant should have access to that information.
Okay, I think, Shihoko, one of the interesting things here is to ask whether he's being made an example of, or if this is par for the course when it comes to situations such as this one with so much money involved. Is this just how they do business in Japan?
Regarding the Japanese legal system, Carlos Ghosn is not being treated any way differently from any other white-collar criminal. The problem, though, is that because of the publicity of this case and the high status that Carlos Ghosn has had, and indeed he has been very much lauded by Japanese society and businesses in the past, how he is treated, whether he is convicted, is going to have repercussions far beyond the walls of Nissan or Renault, and even beyond the Japanese borders. The Japanese really do need to tread very carefully on this because, on the one hand, the Japanese public has already found Carlos Ghosn guilty of the crimes charged against him. But on the other hand, the Japanese criminal system, the trial system itself, is on trial as well. Right. And public opinion, international public opinion, has really turned against the Japanese judicial system.
Help me understand, Shihoko, why public opinion in Japan has turned against him and has already convicted him. What are they saying in public there?
Right. Well, Carlos Ghosn came to Nissan, which was very much a floundering Japanese car manufacturer at that time. And he came in, his nickname was Le Cost Cutter. He took on a company that really needed to have a lot of financial restructuring, a lot of management reform, and he did it mercilessly. And he did it very effectively as well. And so on the one hand, people did appreciate the fact that he has turned around this legendary Japanese company. On the other hand, it has made he has made a lot of enemies as a result of these very severe measures that he's taken. Now, a decade later, the people who have a lot of concerns about his way of doing business are able to turn around and say, you know what? he took on these very punitive mechanisms against his own employees. And look at what he's been doing. He's actually not been good for the company, and that has really soured public opinion on him.
Right. And so, Phil, even though they might be treating him badly, he's been giving interviews, and it's been fascinating, and his daughters have been giving interviews as well, right? Now, to what do you attribute the fact that they've come out punching and they've stated their case very publicly? We're not used to this, right, when it comes to active investigations and active, cases, right? So they're coming out, they're saying this was about a merger or a deeper merger among the three giants that he was pushing for, and it's a power struggle within the firm. That's why they tried to kick him out, and they tipped off the Japanese authorities and so on and so forth, right? He's also playing this game publicly. Is he playing this game publicly because he has no other options?
I think that's exactly the problem. He has no option. He's not able to give a fair fight in court. I mean, this man has been detained for several months without even a trial date. He hasn't been given the full evidence against him. His lawyer can't be present during interrogations with prosecutors. So what other avenue does he have? That's exactly why pretrial justice is a human right. You have to give criminal defendants the option to fight fairly in the courtroom. And Mr. Ghosn doesn't feel like he has that. So his only option is to take to the media. The court of public opinion, as we pointed out, is already shifted heavily against him. So his battle has to be able to at least persuade the public. There's two sides of this story. Without seeing the full scope of what the government has, all he can do is go out and do interviews, get his family to do interviews, and state his innocence.
Right. Shihoko, given that he's playing or fighting on that public battlefield, is that going to impact whether he's convicted or not?
Well, he's certainly gambling that it will play to his favor. In the past, as a manager who has taken on this very extreme way of doing business that went against the grain of the Japanese business style, he took to the media to win public support for the way of his conducting business. He's trying to use that same formula to win, especially international public opinion, to use the international arena to ensure that he has the support that he needs to, if not get out, at least be to not be prosecuted as severely as he could be. It's a big gamble. Personally, I think his family hasn't done him a lot of favors. I think the Japanese haven't really been able to cry over his daughters complaining that they can't get access to the many houses that he has worldwide. But at the same time, when we do hear stories about him really being emaciated, being really stressed and going literally gray before our eyes, that does bring about a lot of compassion in a lot of people.
Right. His daughter Caroline telling the New York Times he's not a terrorist, he's not El Chapo. Every detail we learn is heartbreaking. Phil, when you read what his daughter says in the press and when you read what's coming out from the family, what does that tell you about his defense right now?
What it tells me is they're still trying to put it together. They haven't been able to communicate very much until very recently. So the family is involved. They should be more involved from Mr. Ghosn's perspective, because a lot of the allegations here have to deal with financial dealings, his homes in different parts of the world, what was being used in them. The family is very relevant to him being able to build his own defense. And just to add to Shihoko's point, in terms of the gamble that he's taking, socially, he's obviously taking a gamble that he'll be able to convince people that there's another side of this story. But legally speaking, he's already probably bearing the brunt of that gamble. According to the Japanese government, individuals who protest their innocence are actually more likely to be detained pre-trial on the theory that they may destroy evidence or influence witnesses. The whole system in Japan is based on a presumption of guilt. And if you protest your innocence, you're more likely to be detained pre-trial. The fact that Mr. Ghosn has been detained for so many months may very well be influenced by the fact that, according to the government, he's not cooperating. They would love him to see him admit to some of these charges.
Yeah, something that was fascinating that I learned in my reading and preparation for this segment was that more than 99% of criminal indictments result in a conviction in Japan. That jumped out at me. Very finally, Shihoko, How do the Japanese feel that this is an international story? And given that it's this massive international story, their legal system is under scrutiny. Outsiders are questioning whether people get a fair trial in Japan. Is that going down well?
That is definitely not going down well in Japan. It is interesting, though, to see that it is Carlos Ghosn who has been bearing the brunt of this whole scandal, that even though he has been accused of lining his pockets, there should also be this greater insight into how the system itself, how within Nissan this actually went through as well. But so on the one hand, the Japanese feel that the criminal or the person who should be tried is Carlos Ghosn and not the Japanese judicial system. At the same time, they are aware that it is an opportunity for them to highlight that Japan is able to bring justice in a way that it sees fit. So it's almost a trial of Japanese values in their mind.
Yeah, and as I was reading, they say that there was around about a 2-hour tussle or argument when he was detained because he refused to believe he was being detained. At the same time, they went after Greg Kelly, the American lawyer, another board member as well. And Ghosn couldn't believe that they were coming after him. So it's fascinating. He's been in jail. This is ongoing, and I appreciate both of you. This is, it's a tough one to sort of thread the needle when the trial is ongoing, but it's been good to get your perspectives. Phil Talfian and Shihoko Goto, thanks for joining us here on the Newsmakers.